make it clear.
Order. I did not make the comment.
Bill, it's not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very, very, very Auckland perspective. Warning, we are as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight for our final show this year, two of our favourite panellists. She is from the Auckland University Department of Film, TV and Media Studies and lectures at Massey Uni, one of the best bloggers in New Zealand, Phoebe Fletcher, and he is an author, a columnist and political commentator, proof that the revolution will be televised, blogger Chris Trotter. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight on our 2013 predictions special, issue 1, what predictions for the political parties next year? Issue 2, what happens to the economy in 2013? And issue 3, what will be the big news stories in the upcoming year? Plus, we'll end the show with a final prediction, but let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. 2013 is mid-election cycle and the government need to start doing something right. Phoebe Crusher-Collins is jockeying for leadership post-key. How much power grabbing will she be allowed before Joyce and English move against her?
Well, I think, the interesting thing here, of course, is that Joyce and English don't really like each other either.
No, they don't.
But yeah, she is sort of beginning to position herself as the next potential leader. So I think it would depend on how the polls go, but I think you're going to see some internal fights going on there. And as we've seen this year, it's probably going to come out through the blogs.
Would she be a very vicious Prime Minister?
I think... if people said, Helen Clark was, had her media tightly controlled, I would say that Judith Collins would be about 100% more strict on that sort of thing.
Would she be more vicious or sadistic? Which one? I mean, that's the spectrum with Judith. Where would she take the country?
Where would she take the country? I think that, she is kind of fairly conservative on her law and order. So I think she would be less of the middle road that you see with Key, which is a kind of flip-flop answer that you would see, much more of a kind of conservative bent. And those push-button issues of law and order, beneficiaries and so on would really come to the fore.
So we would see maybe crush beneficiaries as an actual state policy, and she'd probably win if she came out and said, "I'll crush all the beneficiaries." She'd probably take a large, maybe even a larger percentage.
Yeah, if you look at all the commentators at the moment, they're trying to position her as New Zealand's version of Margaret Thatcher.
It's terrifying, isn't it?
It is terrifying.
It's like a female Dalek. Who wants that as a Prime Minister?
She's been positioned as the Iron Lady that could potentially lead us through. I think it really depends on whether National continue to float through. I mean, they do have some hard economic conditions that are going to begin to kick in next year. So everyone will be looking to the polls. I think internally within the National Party, there's going to be grabs for power as well. So you will have some factions infighting.
Chris, Tariana is stepping down from the Māori Party, but the Constitution says a male and female co-leadership, denying to Uraroa Flavel his leadership aspirations. What now for the Māori Party in 2013?
Look, I think when Tariana finally departs, the Maori Party will face enormous difficulties. I think Peter Sharple's ability to hold the Auckland Maori seat, is questionable.
If Shane Jones had given it a real go last time, he could have taken it, couldn't he?
Well, possibly. I'm not sure whether Shane Jones is the man to beat Peter Sharples in a fair fight. But I do think Te Uraroa faces a real challenger in Annette Sykes.
Right.
I think if Annette had got her campaign going a little earlier last time, she would have come much closer to defeating him in 2011. By 2014, I think he's in real trouble. So it may be an engorged mana party that we see in 2014, which would be no bad thing, some people on the left might say. Some people on the right, on the other hand, would probably run screaming from the room. But I think the Maori Party has pretty much done its dash. It has achieved very little in practical terms. It's had some very significant symbolic victories. Most particularly the signing of the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
But that was pretty much it, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the flying of flags and so forth. And the, you know, you should never underestimate the power of symbols.
Yep.
But apart from those, I don't think there's much they've got to show for all their time with National.
Do you think the strategy of sitting at the table stands any scrutiny when John Key has privatised that table? I mean, if he sold the table and they're still sitting there, where do they go from there as a political force?
Well, that's going to be one of the stories of next year, clearly. I'm beginning to think that the left-wing parties are going to fail to get the numbers for their petition.
Yep.
And if they look back at history, they would never have attempted it.
Right.
The left has tried to use the citizens-initiated referendum law
that's right.
many times before, and
Yep.
it has failed, I think, on nearly every occasion, if not on every occasion.
Yep.
That will be a huge blow to the morale of
Yep.
the anti-asset sales,
Yep.
and I suspect that the government will probably emerge with the seal of approval from the Supreme Court. Their decision on the stolen body,
Yep.
which was announced just a few days ago, where they said that common law trumps tikanga.
Yep.
That was an unexpected decision from the Supreme Court, which has always been seen as the Maori's best friend.
Sure.
I'm not sure that's true anymore.
I think we call that a burial dispute, don't we? But I would agree with you. I think, you know, there is a possibility, particularly over the water rights thing, of that, you know, collapsing the Māori Party. And I think that, you know, people like Nanaia Mahuta, who's got strong roads into Tainui, you know, might be picking up some of that more conservative Māori vote. Because if you look at the Māori vote, it is very split between, you know, older Māori who see, you know, something like the Māori Party and sitting at the table as it were, as a better option, and the kind of younger, more radicalised, I suppose, in terms of the politics that tend to go with mana. And I would agree with you on that I think Annette Sykes is a force, particularly when you see her begin to argue you've got Native Affairs as an outlet for that sort of politics. I think, you know, give it the run up to the election, and yes, she will certainly be taking on Te Urura.
What do the Greens need to do to get 15%? Where do they need to go policy-wise? What do they need to do party machine-wise?
Well, I think, you know, in some ways they have positioned themselves to the left of Labour, which is not hard.
Not very difficult these days, not very difficult.
Labour, you know, particularly under Shearer, tend to be positioning themselves as much more sort of centre-right, really.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, focusing on the child poverty issue, again, I think, you know, the way that Russell Norman has come forward to talk about the economy, even if a lot of the right-wing media commentators don't like his talk of printing money. I think these are good things. I think it you know, their votes are going to depend on how strong Labour is, and I can't see Labour being that strong.
Well, let's get into that. Chris, can David Shearer lead the Labour Party to better polling? Is he safe in February?
Oh yes, I think he's safe in February. You know, what happened after the conference really paid, I think, to the rank and file's aspirations to choose the leader.
Yeah.
No one's going to put their hand up in February. Certainly not 13 or 14 hands.
Yeah.
So Shearer's safe now, I think, right through until the election. It's already clear, however, to me, listening particularly to people on the right talk, that there's a kind of scenario developing, and it works something like this. The economic situation continues to deteriorate. The chances of John Key winning the next election similarly decline. That's all right though, because the Labour Party will be led by someone who will not upset the apple cart, will not frighten the horses, and who is perfectly placed to keep the Greens under control. Keeping the Greens under control is the absolute sine qua non for the right.
Right.
So it seems to me that if the Greens have any wit at all in terms of their long-term interests, they need to go hard for as many votes as they possibly can. They need to take Labour on, and they need to signal well out from the election so that the electors don't get taken by surprise that power is not what it's all about. Policy is what it's all about.
Yeah.
And if the Greens are not satisfied that the right policies will be adopted by whatever government it
Then
is,
they shouldn't go in.
they will not be going in.
Yeah,
That's
And
what
I
they
think
good point.
We
good
have
point.
seen this, shift already over the last couple of weeks. I mean, we had Key, through most of the last year, pulling out their, kind of partnership with the Greens in terms of the home insulation policy
yep.
as being a successful example of working across. Whereas over the last couple of weeks, we've begun to see him hitting those buttons in terms of attacking the Greens in order to weaken.
Question to both of you. Mana's Feed the Kids bill is due up first thing next year. How important will the smaller parties play in 2013?
I think the smaller parties always play a role. I think that we have seen a number of bills that have been brought through by smaller parties, and in particular the Greens have been, very effective in that. I think it provides them a kind of issue through which they can kind of band together. I mean, I don't know where you would see United Future in that, but they're also very sort of family focused. So, I noticed that in his last couple of releases, he started to kind of position himself away from national slightly. But I think, they do play an important role in bringing this to the table. That's something where the Māori Party and Mana and the Greens agree. So I think that, this will become more of an issue after the break.
Brendan Horan suddenly relevant. Who would have thought? Who would have thought it, Chris?
Well, I'm not altogether sure that he is. An unfortunate situation, and only likely to get worse for poor Mr. Horan. But the smaller parties have the luxury of putting on the table clearly thought out alternatives to government policy. They can do this by announcing policy, they can do this by introducing private members' bills. And it's something that they do a bit of, but they could probably do more of, particularly the Greens. Because winning the battle of ideas is absolutely crucial if you are a Green Party, if you are a Mana Party. What you need is a groundswell of popular opinion in a particular direction. And that's what, as a small party, you need to try and do. You need to try and get the government in front of a very big wave of public concern or public enthusiasm for a particular set of policies. And this is where I think Labour fails dismally. It still seems to think that you can release a whole swathe of policy 3 or 4 months or 3 or 4 weeks, God help us, before an election, and somehow that's clever.
Yeah. Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2. Are we past the worst of the recession caused by the 2007 financial market collapse, or has the printing money solution simply kicked the real market correction further down the road, and will we face that correction in 2013? Chris, tell me, please, the Americans aren't stupid enough to drive us off a fiscal cliff. Are they?
Well, there's a very, very delicate dance being undertaken between John Boehner and Barack Obama at the moment, and it's a lot of bluff, it's a lot of plain chicken. Obama has a terrible tendency to offer his opponents too much, but fortunately for Obama, his opponents have a terrible tendency not to realise a good deal is sitting on the table when it's there. That's what's happening at the moment. America can afford to go off this metaphorical cliff, not for too long, but I think Obama needs to see 2013 as the year that he calls the Republicans bluff.
Right.
And he makes America realise just how crazy the Republican Party is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fiscal cliff issue has been overblown somewhat, and it really kind of taps into that partisanship that drives American politics, where it becomes about being as different as possible rather than actually debating the issues. It's interesting to see Paul Ryan re-emerging as, a key Republican advisor on the fiscal cliff. He has been brought in right when they thought that they might send him away for a couple of years to potentially bring him back later on for another election push.
Phoebe, TPPA has to be ratified in October next year, and the legislative agenda to comply domestically with it would need to be rammed through before the full implications of how deregulated it would make the economy made clear to the electorate in election year. Do you think John Key is going to sign it?
I think John Key is very keen to sign it.
Yeah.
I think what was interesting to me watching Media 7 and so on is seeing people like Fran O'Sullivan even beginning to worry about the farming implications of it. I was very surprised to hear her say that we shouldn't make too many concessions. I think, that this issue is not over, particularly on the internet copyright one.
Yep.
I think that is something that will really get New Zealanders going.
Can he risk it though, politically? I mean, if he's trying to ram through all of these changes through Parliament in the beginning of 2014, New Zealanders are going to realise that the majority of the changes are about deregulating our domestic industries. There's going to be a backlash to that, isn't there?
Yes, but I think, there really hasn't been a lot on the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement on the news.
Sure,
the news
sure.
tends to be, dominated by this kind of celebrity politics thing that we've discussed
Well, John
before.
Key's doing Gangnam Styles. We don't need to talk about the TPPA for crying out loud.
Well, he's doing Gangnam Styles on, the day that they talk about the surplus only
Isn't
being
amazing,
66
isn't it?
million.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That seems to divert the majority of attention.
Yeah.
I don't know if there'll be that much about it in the mainstream media coverage.
I think the other thing with the TPPA is that certainly people like Jane Kelsey, who knows probably more than anybody else in New Zealand about it, apart from Tim Grosser.
Yes.
She's reasonably confident, I think, that it's not going to fly.
Right.
Now, the Japanese just elected the Liberal Democratic Party to power in a landslide,
Yes,
I might add.
yes.
Now, the Liberal Democratic Party won that election on a nationalist
That's right.
platform.
Yeah.
And the Liberal Democratic Party is absolutely bound up with the Japanese countryside.
So very protectionist.
Very protectionist. And I would be very doubtful that TPPA is going to fly. The Americans have set October next year as the date for a decision.
Yeah.
But it may turn out that by October next year it's clear that it's not going anywhere.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that because there has been news, for example, this week coming out about Taiwan, the same kind of fears over China. And you have seen, kind of ructions going on there with the movements in the China Sea. Like we are really watching, particularly with the new leader being appointed, China attempting to reposition itself. But, internally there are frictions there.
Chris, China is combating America in the Pacific not by military power, but by economic power. When does Chinese investors buying residential property up in New Zealand, when does that become a political backlash here?
Only when property prices collapse. At the moment, those Chinese property investors are just making middle-class Aucklanders beam from ear to ear, as they have done for the last 10 or so years, because the pressure on housing coming from people with apparently limitless resources at their disposal means that Auckland house prices go from 500,000 to 600,000, presumably to 7, 8, 9.
Sure.
If you're sitting on Auckland property, you're just grinning from ear to ear. You're just watching your equity go through the roof. Bad luck if you're young and you haven't got a house and you're trying to buy one because it's just climbing way out of sight.
Phoebe, does anybody other than Bill English and John Key honestly believe we will be in surplus by 2014? I mean, when does this start looking like they don't actually have a plan?
Well, I mean, the thing is that, some of the projections that this is based on are far too optimistic. Treasury consistently.
I mean, our Treasury on Prozac, I mean, it seems that they are so happy and optimistic and very up about everything. Is there a
Prozac,
problem?
there are much more powerful drugs than Prozac.
I think New Zealanders in general are on Prozac. I mean, if you look at the Reserve Bank's survey of businesses where they think that unemployment is, going to steadily drop from 7.3 to 6.8% next year and then 6.3% the following year. I think that we are being a tad optimistic in terms of our growth, which has been characteristically low. I do think that Gordon Campbell is right, though, that if it's, 66 million is a kind of drop in the bucket, it really needs to be more than $1 billion to affect our economy.
What does unemployment look like in 2013, Chris?
Well, the news out of Australia is not good. In terms of that economy's health, and if Australia, sneezes, we catch a very severe cold and Australia is sneezing because China is snuffling. As with most things these days, everything comes back to Beijing. And what China does in 2013, how successfully it manages its economy, how successfully it manages its population, which is becoming increasingly restive, how it manages its relationship with the Japanese, with the Taiwanese, whether or not China makes a decisive move to establish control of these islands in the China Sea, and just how that plays out internationally. These are all important matters, and they will all affect New Zealand. China is the new Britain for New Zealand. It's where our exports go, it's where our future lies, and Britain told us what to do, and China will tell us what to do.
What does unemployment look like in 2013?
Well, I suppose, kind of like Chris says, it does depend on the overseas situation. But I think that, one of the things that is becoming very clear if you look at the Statistics New Zealand figures is that we are seeing a kind of increasing casualisation of the workforce. So while we have had a slight rise in full-time equivalent employment, that is actually being pushed up by casualisation. So we've actually got a kind of drop in jobs going on at the same time. So I can't see it improving as optimistically as that Reserve Bank survey says, but I also think that casualisation, like that poll earlier this year which says we could be looking at kind of 1 in 5 New Zealanders that are sort of underemployed. I think this is going to be an ongoing challenge that we face.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3, as we continue to peer into our crystal ball, what will the big news stories of 2013 be? Phoebe, Māori water rights headed to the Supreme Court. One insider told me they were suggesting a 3-4 ruling to Māori. What do you think the implications will be for the asset sales?
Well, I think that puts a huge spanner in the work of the asset sales, doesn't it, really? Because, it is going to scare foreign investors and drive that share price down.
Yep. Chris, does the investigation of the role played by the GCSB in the Kim.com spying fiasco have the potential to explode in John Key's face?
No, spies are always safe.
Yeah.
And their masters are always safe because spies are always safe. If they come too close, something will happen to drive them away.
Kim.com says he's got the evidence to suggest that Key knew before he says
I would be very surprised if it gets to anything near a point where the spy agency is going to be exposed to any serious extent, and therefore the Prime Minister will be made vulnerable. These things just aren't allowed to happen. If they do happen, then it's all on man and boy.
Right. So if he does, if he's got the goods,
I seriously think that something will happen before then. I mean, leaving
Kim
aside,
will die.
suddenly
have an accident.
Well, there's an option that's never happened before in relation to spy agencies, has it? But it's a question not just of the GCSB and Mr. Key. It's a question of the FBI.
Right.
The FBI is asked now by the courts in New Zealand to present evidence to
they're not going to present
Kim.com's legal team.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen, the whole extradition thing may just go away.
Right. So you think the case might just fall over?
I think that's a higher possibility than our spy agency, which is really, the Five Eyes, not just our own. And those sort of people just don't get exposed.
Final question to both of you. What's your pick for the big news story next year?
Oh, I think, it will be Labour leadership, definitely.
Yeah.
I think in February, there's, I think while they've tried to stamp out any sort of dissent, I don't know whether that will necessarily go away. I think that there will be speculation. It will be dependent on Shearer's performance.
Yep.
If you saw him on The Nation last weekend, he hasn't improved drastically. Yep. And if Brian Edwards is right, that's something that can't be taught. I think also in February, obviously with Hekia Parata choosing what schools close, we're going to see some ructions there in Christchurch. Whether they actually can legally strike or not is another thing. Yep. But I think the decision to try and integrate charter schools into Christchurch first was a very bad one when those people were under so much pressure already.
Big news story of next year?
Well, I think, contrary to what your informants say, the Supreme Court will uphold the government's position on the asset sales on water rights, and that will mark the beginning of a walking away on the part of the Pākehā establishment from the partnership position.
Right, right.
I think that is now reaching a point where if it goes any further, I think particularly the parties of the right will rise in revolt. And I think the judiciary understands that it's gone about as far as it can go. If it intervenes to stop a program of asset sales, which by any ordinary definition of parliamentary mandate the government certainly has, then there will be consequences.
Let's wrap the show with a final prediction. Phoebe, your final prediction for next year?
I guess the thing that I would be wanting to monitor is how well the targets go that National is setting for the public service. Given the problems that they have had in the UK, for example, with the health services, and just the way that people tend to respond to those sorts of targets is that employees want to reach them, so therefore they recategorise things. And with the NHS, you saw for example, beds and corridors being reclassified as rooms and so on. So the target, I think, is one thing that I would be monitoring closely.
Yeah. Final prediction next year?
That unemployment will rise, that social divisions will sharpen, that the government's position will probably be strengthened as a result because of the weakness of the parliamentary opposition.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Phoebe. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final prediction. Even though John Banks is a dead man walking in Epsom, I predict that No Mates National will hold on to the coattailing element of MMP because it will forever keep Epsom in play for the right. To camouflage the self-interest of that decision, National will magnanimously lower the threshold to 3% to make them look more democratic. That decision will be the trick, because lowering the threshold to 3% would give the Conservative Party and the newly formed Rural Party a chance to gain representation and become National Party allies. I also predict Stephen Sharp, the new replacement show for Close Up, will provide all the intellectual gratification of masturbating with a cheese grater. That's it for 2012. Thank you for tuning in and watching. We return in January next year and, of course, launch on Sky 89 in February. Enjoy your summer, and we will see you fresh next year to continue giving you a broader view of the issues. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand